Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Above all, the Grenfell Tower community itself wants answers. However, what happens now to those who have lost their wives, their husbands, friends, children's homes and all their possession? Why were the repeated, desperate warnings about the safety of the building apparently ignored? Earlier, I spoke to Pilgrim Tucker, who is a community activist who worked with the Grenfell Residents Action Group and was one of those warning voices, and to Randa El-Daouk, a friend of Mohammed al-Jalali, the first named victim of the fire. And I began by asking Randa how she knew him.
I knew him from the Syrian community, and he was loved by all of us. He was loved by people who knew him very well, by people who didn't know him very well, but just through the community. And it's just really sad to see what his family must be going through now. Obviously, they have questions about Mohammed himself. How did this happen? He didn't manage to escape the building, but his body was not burnt. How did that happen?
And he was communicating with his brother and his family by mobile phone in his last moments.
Yeah, he was, and it was. I mean, I just can't imagine how his brothers and the family are going to be able to continue with the struggles that their fate has brought them, to face.
Most of his family are still in Syria, and they will want to come over for the inquest, presumably, and the burial and so forth. Yeah. Have they had any assurances they'll be able to do that? Yeah,
the Home Office has agreed to help reunite the family. And as far as that's helpful, and it will it's the support that the brothers really need at the moment. But I think the main concerns of the family is, why were there helicopters there, filming people, residents burning to death, but not helicopters there to save the residents who were trapped in their flats. I think this question will haunt them for the rest of their lives.
I mean, I assume that it's very, very dangerous for a helicopter to go so close to something so hot. Yeah. Maybe the answer. But there'll be lots of questions, presumably, the family will want to hear answers to now. Yeah,
I mean, surely there are ways for obviously the helicopter could have been spraying water into the building, or even they could have had platforms and nets for people to jump out into. I mean, and the rest of their questions, I mean, a public inquest or an inquiry might answer some of them, but I think the ultimate question is, will all of their concerns ever be resolved?
Randa, you've been in touch with the family, I think, since these terrible events in Syria. How are they coping?
Not very well. Not very well at all. I mean, of course, it's going to help that their family are going to come, but they need closure, and that's going to take a very long time. And the question is, are they ever going to get that in full?
Thank you, Randa. Pilgrim Tucker, you were involved in the community campaign on a lot of these fire issues, going back quite a long time.
Yes.
Now, 7 months or so ago, there was a blog which was very, very explicit about the danger of exactly this kind of fire happening. Just tell us a little bit about the campaign and the frustration of not getting the message through.
I campaigned when, just after the consultation on the works had finished, and the residents had realised that the refurbishment, what they'd been told about the refurbishment, was actually nothing like the reality of what was happening.
Sorry, to be clear, the tower block had been refurbished, but no sprinklers, no fire safety systems had been put in.
No, there was some work done on the boilers, but the rest, I think, what a lot of people are now saying, there was this cladding on the building. Now, people are now saying that was for cosmetic purposes, while there were all these very, very basic sort of safety things that needed doing, like stuff around the fires and the lights on the stairwells. And
I'm sorry to stop you again. So what you're saying is, inside the building, relatively poor families were living in unsafe conditions, but to make the building look pretty to everybody outside, you put cladding on from the outside.
That's certainly what people in the area think and are saying. Well, we now know it's obviously substandard, and it wasn't, it wasn't good quality, and they cut costs on the cladding and used the cheaper cladding. Apparently it was the more flammable one. That will all be looked into, I expect. But the quality of the work going on when I was working with them was so poor. It was just so poor. They were really angry about it. They were really upset about it.
At that stage, did people living in the building fear that a disastrous fire might take place?
They all raised fire safety concerns in those first meetings. There was a catalogue, you know, going back years, a catalogue of problems with the building and a complete, consistent failure.
Theresa May has said that she has got things wrong in the short term and she's produced a new package of measures to help those affected by this disaster. What more do you think the Prime Minister should now be doing? I
mean, what needs to happen right now, immediately, is those families who have survived the fire and who are now homeless need to be given really good accommodation, cost not being an object, as close as possible to where they were living before.
To stay in the community? To
stay in the community, near their family, near their friends. Now, that is possible. We know there's lots and lots of empty houses in the area, whether they have to be, you know, I think somebody's talked about requisitioning them, but I think private rental, you know, we know it's possible. And it's just indicative of how these people felt, you know, they were treated, and I think now how they really strongly feel now is they are the lower income. They're not all poor, they're just ordinary working people. They're not very, very wealthy, and they are just not a priority. They're not important. And the government and the local, you know, the local authority have treated them like rubbish, basically, and they continue to do it.
Pilgrim, Randa, thank you both very much indeed for talking to me.
Thank you.
Pilgrim Tucker there.
Now, my next guest is Nisha Party, who's a film producer and entrepreneur. You turned up on Wednesday outside the still smouldering block, and you were one of those people, perhaps the most important person, who organised immediate help when apparently the council were doing very, very little. Can I ask you now, the Prime Minister said yesterday, criticised the council for not doing enough, said she was going to take charge. Is the help currently being provided that the victims of this appalling event desperately need?
No, in a word. And I mean, just to clarify, I've been based at the Westway and helping to coordinate with a whole team of brilliant people.
And you found the Westway, didn't you?
I went to the Westway because I was being told that's where donations were being accepted, and when I got there was no one organising those donations. Everybody was kind of standing around wanting to help. And I'm just a bossy, organised person, so I kind of stepped in and went, right, let's set this place up and make it work and function.
And you got the beds in?
And we got the beds in, and we got a system going whereby anyone that came in and needed help could get food, could get clothes. There were people organising the clothes in sizes and sexes. Yeah. We had prayer areas for people to go to.
But what's happening now? You've been there presumably last night. I don't know if you've been there this morning.
I haven't been there this morning.
How was it last night?
The only council presence is at the Westway.
And what are they doing there?
They're sending 3 sort of execs that come in every day. The problem is that every day there are 3 different execs. So, as you can imagine, you have a day with them, you try and hand over, you try and explain how the system is working. Those people leave, you get new people coming in the next day who don't know anything. They're coming in from Ealing, from Kensington and Chelsea, from Hammersmith and Fulham. They don't know the area. They're on the phone trying to help. Outside of the Westway, there are 10 or 15 other brilliant centres that are running on their own. They have
by volunteers again?
By volunteers.
So not by the council?
None of them have been visited by the council. None of them are in communication with the council. There is absolutely no help. We're trying desperately to get money to the victims.
So has any official money got to the victims yet?
Kent and Chelsea are giving £10 to the survivors when they go to hotels.
A tenner?
A tenner. There is money pouring in from all these amazing volunteers. We can't get access to the money, and we cannot.
Why can't you get access to the money from the volunteers?
Because no one's telling us where it is. We, as people...
So money's been given by very generous people, and it's not yet getting through to the victims?
No, and, you know, victims were going to hotels, arriving at hotels, with no one from the council to greet them, to check them in, to look after them, to give them clothes and food. Volunteers are now going to hotels with food packages, with cash that they're trying to find, because they have nothing. it's a disaster. And what I really want to just say to anyone in authority that's listening out there is that we as a community are exhausted and broken. We are not experts. We don't know what we're doing. We're trying our best to make it work. We need people to come and help us, and we need them now.
Will you be going back today?
Yes, I will. What we did as volunteers is we handed over to the council officially on Thursday night. So I'm now I've stepped back and I'm trying to get them to run it, but because they're not running it very well, I'm just sort of going in to see if I can do anything to help.
David, Sarah, how shocked are you by what you've just heard?
Just beyond disgusted. You know, when you think, I mean, that people have given money to the Kensington appeal in the expectation that that would be used rapidly to give direct help, to hear that people are just being given £10, I am just appalled to hear that.
David?
I met people yesterday who had been given that £10. They have lost everything. Why are we behaving like this is Victorian England, where charity steps in, people step in, but we don't have local government able to coordinate? And let me say, we know how to do this. We did it after the riots. We do it after floods. So you've got to ask why these people in Kensington and Chelsea are not getting it. What's different to them than exists in the rest of the country? It's an outrage. It's a scandal. It's appalling.
David, thank you, and thank you so much, Nisha. I imagine, like me, you're pretty shocked by what we've just been here. Slightly to my surprise, the Prime Minister's people haven't pulled Philip Hammond from the set, and he's still with me. But first, Allegra.
Well, people out there are reacting to the revelation from our earlier guest, Nisha Party. She was out at the Westway coordinating the response to the Grenfell fire, and she told us earlier that people have been given just a tenner to try and get their life back on track. Here, a viewer, he says, Kensington Chelsea Council have a massive cash reserve due to savings, quote-unquote. Why can't they use some of that to help Grenfell victims? And then a wider point by the journalist Jane Merrick. She says, what happened to accountability? How come 5 days on from one of our country's worst peacetime disasters, no one has resigned or offered to? Robert.
I mean, that is an important point. I'm delighted to be joined by the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. Chancellor, we've just heard from Nisha Party, who's one of the leading volunteers around the area of the Grenfell disaster. She says, for example, the large sums donated by generous British people to help the victims are not getting through. There's no central distribution centre for all the, shoes, clothes, other absolutely essential items that those people need. I mean, the organisation has been a catastrophe.
Well, let me say three things. First of all, we have our first response. The emergency responders, the police, the fire, the NHS are superbly organised, and they do these things very well. They rehearse them, they exercise them.
But there are hundreds of homeless
people. Let me just finish. What's become clear is that the second line response, how we deal in the aftermath of that immediate first response, has not been good enough, and the Prime Minister made that clear yesterday.
But for somebody who prides herself on being competent, why didn't she grip this earlier?
Let me just finish the point.
Okay.
The way we do this in this country is through local authorities. Local authorities lead, but local authorities are very varied. Some are large with extensive capability. Others are much smaller. And I think the lesson of this terrible tragedy and the way that it was handled is that we've got to look again at how we deliver that second response capability, that follow-up capability that deals with the victims, the displaced and their immediate needs, and organises it so that it is better, it is slicker, it is quicker on the ground. But the third point I want to make, because I heard the point that Nisha was making about money, is I can't talk about the private money, the donations, but I can talk about the government money. There's £5 million has been made available for the immediate needs of the victims of this disaster. That money is being distributed. There are DWP officials on the ground distributing it. And at the Cobra meeting yesterday, I asked the specific question, if people are saying they don't know where to go, they don't know how to access this money, what is the answer? The answer is go to the Westway Sports Centre, where the reception facilities, the Westway Sports Centre...
Nisha runs the Westway Sports Centre, and she says, actually, they can't get the money there.
So there are people there now who will direct...
As of this morning, they are there now, are they?
As of yesterday, I understand, as of yesterday afternoon...
She's saying they were not.
There are people there who will act as guides, if you like, handholders to people to take them through the process, make sure that all
So these people will now
needs...
get more than a tenner?
So, yeah, absolutely they'll get more than a tenner. There's £5 million immediately available to be distributed to people for their needs. And that money is there, it is being distributed.
Well, apparently it's not being distributed, but we'll come back to that. Just to be clear, in terms of the poorness of the response, I think what you just said was that Tory-led Kensington and Chelsea Council is incompetent.
No, what I said is that different local authorities operate on different scales and have different response
capabilities. You're not
capabilities.
disagreeing with that, are you?
So, Robert, different authorities are of different size and scale, and I think it's no good blaming a local authority. What we need to do now, I think, is look at how we create a central resource that can immediately reinforce a local authority that is faced with a catastrophe on this scale, because this is this is virtually unprecedented in recent British history. The scale of the response and the needs of the local authority, I think it's right for the local authority to expect that we will provide resource to them to do that. And the Prime Minister's recognised that it wasn't good enough.
Now, there's a lot to talk to you about, but one other huge issue here is why safety standards weren't brought up to standard, particularly after the dreadful Lakanal disaster in Camberwell. Now, the fire advisor to the All-Parliamentary Group on fire safety has criticised the Prime Minister's new Chief of Staff, Gavin Barwell, who was Housing Minister, for not carrying out an important safety review. His position is surely now unsustainable as Chief of Staff, given that he will now be a focus of this inquiry that the government has announced.
Well, my understanding is that the recommendations that were produced after that 2009 disaster have either been followed or are in the process of being implemented. There's a simplification of
He promised a review that never happened.
OK, there's the simplification of recommendations is going on. But look, I don't think anybody would be that interested in a government minister coming on here and marking our own homework. The right way to do this, surely, is for the public inquiry to look at what those recommendations were, to call for the relevant papers, to see the relevant witnesses, and to take a view as to how the government has responded. Has it responded correctly and appropriately to those recommendations, both this government and the previous government, because this was 2009, of course.
But just to be clear, you think, given that he may well end up being censured by an inquiry, his position currently, as her main help, is sustainable?
Well, Gavin Barwell, I'm sure, is an excellent Chief of Staff in the role that he currently has as the Prime Minister. Of course, it will be quite right and proper that the public inquiry will look at how a series of ministers and probably senior officials have responded to recommendations and other things in the past. We're expecting that. That's the point of a public inquiry, to get to the truth.
So, many Labour figures see this disaster as a politically created catastrophe. Jeremy Corbyn has connected it to Tory austerity, and one of his lieutenants tweeted, "Burn neoliberalism, not people." Sir Keir Starmer, Labour's Brexit spokesman, is with me. Do you believe this ghastly event was caused by cuts to local authority budgets and austerity?
Well, can I just first, of course, send my condolences to the families, to the victims and their friends of this human tragedy. I think all of us have been touched simply looking at the images and hearing the stories. We have to tread very carefully. It's clear there are some very, very serious questions that need to be answered about the cladding, about the costing. There's been questions about housing in London for a very, very long time. Lots of issues raised which haven't been answered. So serious questions which require serious answers and accountability.
Has your party been treading carefully, however, because they were very, very quick, the Labour leadership, to say this is caused by austerity, the Tories have blood on their hands and all of that kind of stuff. Boris Johnson has accused the Labour Party of playing politics with this.
Well, I think there is understandable anger and frustration. You've seen that from those living in the Tower block and people living in other similar situations. In Camden, in my constituency, there's great anxiety about people living in similar tower blocks. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us, not only, as it were, to look back and ask those questions,
not to feed the flames of anger.
We do have to look forward, because people want reassurance. So I spent Friday with Camden Council looking at the blocks in Camden. I think all politicians have got a duty to look forward now and to say to their own constituents what is going to happen by way of enhanced fire checks in the coming days and weeks.
You heard one of the activists from the community there saying that nearby properties which are vacant should possibly be requisitioned to ensure that people who have been made homeless by this fire can stay living close to where they were in the community. Do you agree with that?
I think that's one option to look at, and clearly the level of support needs to be in from the start. It's clothing, it's food, but it's also housing. I know that a number of local authorities in London are looking at what properties they've got and how they can help. That needs to come together very, very quickly this week.
Now, there's been a lot of focus on the Tory responsibility for this, but the Labour Party too bears some responsibility. There was a ghastly fire, of course, in South London, and one before that in Southampton. And in 2000, going back a long way, there was a report of the House of Commons which said that the cladding issue needed to be looked at again, and added, "We do not believe that it should take a serious fire in which many people are killed before all reasonable steps are taken towards minimising the risks." That was in 2000. We had another 10 years of Labour government after that.
I think everybody needs to look at why these recommendations over the years have not been implemented. I was Director of Public Prosecutions, and I had to look at the 2009 file in relation to whether there should be prosecutions. It's clear there's recommendations there that should already have been acted upon, and I think we all need to ask serious questions. It's no good having recommendations.
All parties are to blame for this?
All parties need to ask serious questions about why recommendations in the past have not been implemented.
Can I ask you, you mentioned you were DPP, of course. There's a bit of a controversy at the moment. The Prime Minister has announced a public inquiry and promised it will be quick and all the rest of it, but it reports, she chooses the chair of that, the judge who chairs that, and it reports to her. Other people say, no, inquests are much more important because the families get the chance to speak out, get their own lawyers there as well, and we can, of course, then have criminal proceedings, if necessary, against those responsible.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment there's a criminal investigation. I spoke to the DPP yesterday, and there are prosecutors already in advising the police. So the criminal investigation really has to come first. Normally an inquest will only take place at the end of the criminal investigation. So the idea of an inquiry is important because that can, in some circumstances, happen much more quickly. And I think speed is of the essence here.
And to be clear, we'd be talking about manslaughter charges.
Yes. When we were looking at this, when I was DPP, in relation to other fires, we were looking at manslaughter charges. There are wider regulatory offences, but I think manslaughter is the most serious, and that's the one that needs to be looked at first. So a public inquiry allows things to happen more quickly and allows a broader range of questions. And inquests come usually at the end of the exercise.
So you need both. OK.